Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Cramer. Our guest today is Nick Troxel. He's a business attorney, and we're going to talk about the law. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you for having me, Alicia. It's great to be here.
I love what you said before we started recording about being a law firm built by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. Let's talk a little bit about your business and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. So I think that, and the reason I brought it up is that I think a lot of the times when people hear about attorneys or when they work with attorneys, there can often be a disconnect between business owner and attorney, oftentimes because many times the attorneys have never been business owners themselves. They've always thought about entrepreneurship and business ownership from a theoretical perspective. It's sometimes hard for them to relate to what the entrepreneurs are actually going through. They want to say, hey, from a theoretical perspective, you should give us, $20,000 and we'll do every risk mitigation technique possible to button your company up, as much as possible right out of the gate. And maybe for some people that's just a little bit of overkill, right? Given that a lot of people have different goals in their businesses and things like that. So when we were starting the business, so my law partner and I, we were in law school together, and we were both very entrepreneurial. We both knew that we wanted to start our own business at some point and work with entrepreneurs and things like that. What we kind of found out is that oftentimes it seemed that there was a hole in the market, right? Where oftentimes small businesses that aren't kind of the sexy startup that's gonna make an app and change the world and raise $100 million. It's hard for them to really ever get, high quality legal work because, it costs the bigger law firms charge enough that it kind of makes it cost prohibitive, right? Where for a company that's going to raise money and everything like that, it's a little bit easier for them to say, hey, we're going to defer the fees or whatever it may be until you reach this financing stage. Well, for somebody who just wants to, start a small business with a friend or something like that, for them, they're never going to raise 10 million, 100 million bucks, something like that, right? And for them, going and getting $10,000 worth of legal work done just to get the ball rolling before they make any money, it's tough to do. So we basically saw this hole in the market where we said, hey, there's a lot of good business owners or potential business owners who aren't getting good legal work because they can't justify spending that high dollar cost. And so, but they still need it, right? I mean, there's a big gap between $10,000 and using LegalZoom, right? And so what we saw is, hey, instead of trying to go work for another law firm and learn that way, we built our own kind of, firm around, hey, we're going to help people in the small business space with expertise that we've gained through internships from law school. And then, over time, we also did contract work with other law firms to gain expertise in more sophisticated matters, securities, mergers and acquisitions, things like that. And so all that to say, when we first started the firm, we were driving Lyft and keep eating canned beans to keep the lights on. And so that gave us the perspective that just gives us a different perspective than many lawyers because we've been there, right? We've had to decide what costs are the most important, how to drive the things that, we want to focus on the most. And so I think that's an important viewpoint for us to have when we're advising clients, because ultimately what we should do as attorneys is help people mitigate risks in business, but not hinder them from growth or progress. Because ultimately in business, you have to take risks to have big wins. That's just the way it is. And so our goal is to really have an approach where we give guidance where people can continue to grow, continue to take calculated risks, continue to mitigate those risks in the most high value way possible, without, being the people who always say, no, you can't do that.
I absolutely love what you guys are doing. One of the things that I found, and this has partially come through interviewing really, really freaking amazing business owners in a wide variety of different industries, as well as obviously working with clients, working with business owners as a mindset coach for over a decade, and being in the trenches, working as a consultant with all different types of businesses, in many cases, startups. You get an appreciation for people who are really like are in it. They've done it. They get it. They're so much better at their craft. I remember early on when I had my brick and mortar hypnotherapy practice that I had a client come in and he was sitting down in the chair and I'm going through his intake process. And he looks at me and he's so sincere and he says, I so appreciate you because you get it. I went to a therapist and I felt like all they were doing was regurgitating shit that they read out of their textbooks. And there's something really valuable in that from the client customer perspective. When someone really understands it, what the client is actually going through, you can service them so much better than someone who, like you had said, is coming from that different perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a totally different thing, right? I mean, when you're thinking of risk, when you're thinking of issues that can happen in a business or kind of forks in the road, only from a theoretical perspective, it's hard to feel that emotion of the weight and kind of gravity that those decisions carry. And so I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is just remembering that there are other humans on the other side of it. And it's not just, legal theories and things like that to where you're just kind of billing hours. And, I think that, it's no knock on, bigger law firms and things like that, but they're so driven by, hey, just bill more hours, right? And so a lot of times it can just be pretty cookie cutter. Hey, this is what you need. We're spitting stuff out. And it's not as much attention to who are these people that I'm working with? What are their goals? What are their objectives? How do we help them? Because for us, it's like, hey, we want to help people build and protect their dream, right? Hey, we're going to tee you guys up to build it, and we're going to make sure we put things in place so that you don't lose it, right? And so, yeah, it's exciting. I mean, I love working with people and hearing about that passion. And so for me, it's not having a personal touch to it just wouldn't work well.
Let's talk a little bit about the types of things that you help your clients with. So we all know that we need legal assistance for certain types of things, but there's a lot of people maybe who just are somewhat naive to how they can actually be protecting themselves or what they should consider having in place. So can you speak to that a little bit, being in the industry and seeing it from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that people, so again, I will preface this by saying, so what an attorney like I do is really put in place risk mitigation. We put in place things that mitigate business owners' risk. And so oftentimes, the first step that people really need to take, and is something that is, to me, almost non-negotiable, is you have to get some type of limited liability entity in place, whether that be a corporation, an LLC, or any other kind of form of limited liability entity. The reason being is, even if your business isn't making money right out of the gate, to where, hey, there's not as much at risk there. If you don't have some type of limited liability entity in place, and you're just going out, you're operating with doing business as, or a trade name, and you're just a sole proprietor or a general partnership, you don't have one of these entities in place. If something happens and you're sued, your personal assets are at risk as well as the assets of the business. So your home, your personal savings account, your stocks, anything you own, right, is at risk of being taken in that lawsuit. So, not only are you at risk of, hey, this business might fail, but this business might derail your whole life, right? And so the thing that you want to always do is, when you're starting these new ventures, is have some type of limited liability entity in place, because if you operate those businesses, if you operate through an entity like that, you, as long as you keep, don't commingle your funds, you operate it as a separate and distinct entity. If something is to happen through the LLC, your personal assets are not at risk. So somebody sues the LLC, they can only collect against the assets of the LLC. There's not going to be, unless you personally guarantee something, right? But you shouldn't have to do that out of the gate for much, because banks not going to give you a loan and things like that anyways, in most circumstances. But your personal assets are going to be protected. So it's like, hey, if the business fails, at least your whole life isn't derailed, right? You dust off and you take another swing at it, maybe with something else, right? And obviously you don't start out thinking, hey, failure is imminent, but again, you want to mitigate that risk. And so that's something that right away, I think that hiring an attorney to do that is obviously optimal, but I like to think about legal protection as kind of on a spectrum of, hey, even if you just take that step and file for an LLC yourself, especially in Colorado, it's pretty easy. It takes like 5 minutes. It costs $1. And you can file your LLC, get a separate bank account, things like that. You're going to at least be a good chunk of the way there to being protected. And so that's one thing that we help a lot with, that to me is, hey, people just really need to do this, because otherwise you're just operating in a really unnecessarily risky manner. The second one that we see a lot of is just not having written agreements in place. And then people get upset because, somebody that they provided services for, or somebody that they sold goods to, there's a disagreement over, something in there, right? Who was to pay what, when they were to pay it, what happens if payment wasn't done, what the scope of work was, things like that, right? And so having written agreements in place not only protects you from a legal perspective in terms of, hey, if you need to enforce your rights legally, you have that there, but it also just makes the process of going through putting together a contract with somebody else is going to just make sure people are aligned from the beginning. And so it's important, not just from the perspective of, hey, you have something there to back you up if things go wrong, but it's also important from the perspective of, hey, this should get everybody on the same page from the outset so that there isn't, as much disagreement down the road. So those are, for small businesses, those are things I see pretty often. Something that I see somewhat less often, but that is very, very high risk, is people just taking money from investors or, just other people without speaking with a lawyer. Just because whenever you're taking money from other people into your business, as an investment, you're subject to US securities laws, and they're there's a lot to them, right? There's a lot of rules and regulations around how and when and what disclosures you need to make. And if you don't follow them, you can be at risk, both the business and personally. So that's a lot of the stuff we help with, right? Is helping guide people through forming, growing, and exiting a business while mitigating risk and being able, making sure that they're not liable for anything legally.
So a lot of people are not going to have as much understanding of, once I have this entity in place, whether it's an LLC or whatever, what does that actually mean? Not commingling funds. What are the things that I have to make sure I do, and the things that I need to make sure I don't do? So are you sort of operating as an advisor, in the sense that you're helping your clients understand, how do I actually use this properly so that it does mitigate risk for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we do provide, whenever we work with clients, we provide kind of a best practices sheet that says, hey, these are the big things you need to be making sure you do. And when I say commingle funds, you want to make sure that you have separate bank accounts, so that you personally have a separate bank account from your business, and that all the money that's being paid to the business goes through your business bank account. The expenses that the business pays are paid out of the business bank account. If you need to put money, instead of paying it personally, you personally put money into the business bank account, and then the business would pay those expenses to maintain that separate and distinct, separation between yourself individually and your LLC, because that's what a court would always look at when they're determining, hey, have you operated this LLC correctly? They're looking at, hey, is this LLC actually a separate and distinct legal entity with, its own bank account? It receives its own revenue, it pays its own expenses, it files its own, tax return if needed. It's not always necessary for certain entity types, but different things like that, right? Are you signing contracts on behalf of the LLC? Is your lease, being signed on behalf of the LLC as opposed to yourself individually? Are you holding yourself out as an LLC, right? Or do your business cards? One of the things I like to show people as an example, right, is on our business cards, we have, I don't know if you can see that, but we have the branded logo here, Troxel Fitch, and then below we list it with the LLC, because that's, you want people to know that are doing business with you, hey, this entity is a limited liability company. The idea being that people may or may not change the way they behave in relation to you if they know that you're an LLC, right? If they don't know you're an LLC and they think, hey, this is just a sole proprietor, they might not ask for a personal guarantee. And then, they find out it's an LLC. They might claim that, hey, we had no idea this was an LLC. We want to, try to come after you personally anyways. If they know it's an LLC, they're not going to be able to kind of make that claim, right? And so that's why all your contracts, as much as possible, your marketing, things like that, people are on notice that, hey, this isn't Nick Troxel, this is Troxel Fitch LLC.
Awesome. So right there, everyone, couple of important takeaways.
Absolutely, yeah.
You might have just given someone out there an aha, like, oh man, I've been doing that wrong.
Yeah, well, and I think that's something that I do think that that's one thing you run into, especially with people who do use things like LegalZoom and things like that, is they don't tend to have as much of that kind of advice in terms of operationally, hey, you got your LLC documents. All right, now what do you do? What do you do with these? Other than, most people know, hey, you go open up a separate bank account, but that nuance of, hey, let's not pay, my personal credit card directly out of the business or something like that, right? It's those things oftentimes, especially first-time business owners, don't realize.
So let's shift gears just a little bit. And I want to speak to you as the business owner. So One of the only canned interview questions I ever do is to ask my guests to share one mindset obstacle that you've personally had to overcome in order to get to where you are today in your business.
Yeah, well, I think that the main one, the big one that I can think of, right, is that idea of kind of imposter syndrome of, hey, are you really qualified to do this? Especially because as a lawyer who started the firm right out of law school, law school is one of these places that you kind of have beat into you that, hey, you learn the law, but you don't always learn how to practice law. And they kind of drill into you, hey, you need to go work for a big law firm and learn all these different things. And so as you start to practice, that was a big thing to overcome, because you have the tools to learn these things, but you don't have that kind of person to say, hey, this is totally right. And so it takes some time of seeing other people's work and drilling down on things for you to realize, hey, we are doing really good work and we do know what we're talking about, even in these more complex situations. And I think that's something that a lot of people have to overcome, right? That idea that, hey, I don't know, I'm not, I think that people get in their own way a lot of like, hey, I'm not quite qualified to do this, or I can't take on this big opportunity, or, and I think that, that Richard Branson quote is a good one where it's like, hey, if you don't always know exactly how to do something, you take it on anyways and you figure it out, right? Obviously there's some balance to that, don't do something that's going to blow up your business because you mess it up truly, but that kind of mindset.
If you haven't gone to law school, don't accept a job operating on somebody's legal team and figure it out.
Right. There is some caveats, right? But that I think is the biggest mindset thing that myself and many other people have to overcome, is just having that confidence. And the way I like to think about it is you kind of stand at the edge of the cliff, and instead of being scared, you curl your toes over the edge and you kind of embrace the uncertainty that comes with entrepreneurship, right? Because it's never going to be straightforward, and not every day is always going to be perfect, right? You have ups and downs, and that's just the way it is.
Well, that's why I have a job. So I will say that from my experience, everyone experiences some degree of imposter syndrome. It's a very elegant label that we have found to slap on a whole shit ton of insecurities that we experience as human beings, and especially as business owners. It's common in a lot of different industries. It's common in corporate. It's common for people who are coming out of being a stay-at-home mom and getting their first job in 15, 20 years. It's part of the journey for us, and it's super, super common for us to question ourselves when we're stepping into something new and unknown. And I love when guests like you share, because so many people have this misconception that, oh, they're just so much more confident than I am. Oh, the success that I see that someone else has accomplished is because somehow they're better than I am, without recognizing that, no, we're all human. We're all bumping up against this stuff. It's an ongoing journey of doing the inner work, getting out of our own way, and moving forward in spite of fears, doubts, and insecurities. But now when you've got the stuff that's really tripping you up, there's support for that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you make, right? I think that especially nowadays with social media, and how that has tied into entrepreneurship, it's easy to think that everybody has everything figured out and people don't ever lose. But I think that the thing you have to keep in mind as an entrepreneur is that oftentimes your failures, your losses, things like that are actually your greatest opportunities to then succeed, right? You learn so much from that you can't view failure or getting something wrong as, hey, this is the end of everything, because you are going to make mistakes. There are going to be just things that go wrong. That's just the way life is. And it's happening to everybody, right? It doesn't matter how pretty somebody's Instagram or Twitter is, or how well they make it seem like they're doing at every step of the way. I think that's one thing I've learned the most in entrepreneurship, is that people are good about painting a picture of them kind of being infallible. And it's just really, I find it be very infrequently the case.
Well, one of the things we've done really well on this particular podcast is dispel a lot of those common myths and misconceptions. And I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that someone's marketing appearance is just that. It's the marketing facade. And let's be real. You're not going to go out there and you're not going to say, hey, we had a really shitty month. Come hire us. We're really great. We're really great attorneys. You're going to say, hey, we're knocking it out of the park for our clients. Come do business with us. So from a marketing perspective, it makes sense, but people forget that when they're seeing, other people in their industry who appear to be succeeding, and they're looking at, oh shit, I don't have enough, clients this month, or whatever the case may be. And you've just got to remember to put it back into perspective and try not to let your negative emotions get the best of you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Nick, you've got to tell us, how can our listeners connect with you? What's the website and any other ways that our listeners can find you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the website is www.troxelfitchlaw.com. And so that's really going to be the best way to get a hold of us. If you just go to the website, you can either submit a form with us directly through the website, or the phone number is listed on the website as well. It's usually easier to kind of just have that as the, start there. You can read about us, read it up on the bios and what we do a little bit more. And then, we always welcome people reaching out. And we do offer a free 15-minute phone call. Just, we can't offer free, long consultations, but we do offer those free 15-minute phone calls to say, hey, do you have a legal issue we could potentially help with, and things like that. And so if anybody listening has something they'd like to discuss, feel free to go to the website and, get in touch with us. We'd be happy to chat and help you out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick, for being with
Absolutely.
us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone listening. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.